I was 16 when I started my senior year, ended up graduating when I was 17. And then I got arrested shortly after in juvenile hall, and I was arrested until I was at 18. And then again, I subsequently caught this main case that sent me to prison when I turned 19. I fought my case for about 3 years, and eventually I was sentenced to 24 years in prison. The Jewish people, to me, became this sort of ultimate proof that God existed. I wanted to be Jewish, but who did I know, and who would take a chance on somebody whose whole body is covered in tattoos, has spent, over a decade in prison? Like, who's going to take a chance on me?
Welcome to Ordinary People with Extraordinary Stories. I'm Chana Weisberg, host of this podcast. Joining me today, we have an incredible guest. His name is Dr. Yehudah Price. Dr. Price is a therapist. He's a father. He's a Jew, but he's also an ex-convict who was in prison for many, many years as a gangster. And it was there that he actually found Judaism, which is an incredible story. And I'm so excited to hear it and to share it with you all. Dr. Price, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor, it's a privilege to be on the show. I have an affinity for Chabad, for all the work they've done to so many Jews, but especially to those that are very marginalized in prison, right? That the true believer in second chances.
Absolutely. And if your story is anything, it's about second chances.
Yes.
So to start us off with your story. Tell us a little about your background, where you were born, and how you became the gangster, the notorious gangster that you became.
Well, it's a long story, so I could kind of condense how that happened, which essentially, my mother was born and raised a Muslim with her 9 siblings in another country, Sri Lanka particularly, and my dad was a Baptist from Jamaica. They both immigrated here. I didn't have like a extended family, so to speak, here. It was just them two, and I dealt with a lot of racism, a lot of not fitting in, right? And
You grew up in California, right?
I grew up in California, yes, Southern California, Orange County particularly, though after after feeling like I was being teased and bullied and not fitting in because of the color of my skin, that became a very sort of salient thing for me. I was chased home and called the N word in front of my family.
Were your
And
family Black, or were they all Black? No.
no, so my
No.
my mother's Sri Lankan, she's brown skinned. I don't, kind of hard to, like, oh, that's a Sri Lankan, right? That doesn't necessarily come up in people's minds the first thing on their mind. And my stepdad was white. And so my siblings appeared white. They're essentially white, and so I stood out. We'll say the least. I stood out,
Did you feel that you didn't fit in? Is that like something that you felt was a big thing in your childhood?
yeah, I didn't fit in with my family, but not necessarily because I felt that way because of how they treated me or anything like that, but kind of
Mm,
just like how the outside world said,
mm,
"Look at your stepfather's white," and I
mm,
and I got it from both sides, meaning there were white kids, older kids in my neighborhood who chased me home, and there was also black kids that said I wasn't black enough
mm,
because I had a white family, right? And so
mm,
as a kid trying to navigate this was hard. And not only that, like I say I experienced this. I don't want to act as if this was the totality of my experience, but when you're young, you don't need a lot of your peers to have an opinion of you to kind of make that your world and judge yourself over it. And so I had
right.
a lot of self-limiting beliefs came up from that particular experience. Right?
Wow. Really shows a sense of belonging, how important it is.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Mhm.
But the people I ran across people that made me feel like I belonged. A lot of times when you feel like an outcast, there are groups of
Mhm.
people that feel like outcast, or whether for whatever reason they happen to be gang members. There was are people just committing crime and people who didn't want to follow the rules, and I thought, well, I'm not bought into society's rules, because society, as I experienced it in my limited capacity as a kid, didn't really like
Mhm.
my experience. So why was I obligated to follow these particular rules?
Mhm.
But
Did those gangs make you feel like you fit in? Did they make you feel welcome?
They made me feel welcomed, and not only that, I think they gave me a mechanism to belong. Meaning,
Mm,
through my actions, I could belong more, as opposed to when you're just judged by your skin color. There's nothing
mm,
really you can do, achieve, say that can change your situation. And without that sort of pathway, it's kind of like you don't know what to do, especially if you're a
mm,
kid, right? And I didn't
for
necessarily
sure.
have people in my home that could tell me how to deal with this sort of W. E. Du Bois calls it a double consciousness of of being black, and then also judging your actions and the way you think and who you are by the what you imagine to be the view of the majority culture around you, right? And
Hmm.
so it was a hard thing to kind of navigate.
Did you ever speak to anybody about it? Did you ever like speak to your parents about it, or
Yeah, I think in a limited capacity. Obviously, I'm able to articulate my experience a lot better now,
of course?
in hindsight, and so they knew, because there were people who chasing me home, and they may call me the N word in front of my family and circle around on their bicycles, taunting me. So they knew I experienced it, and there were different times at school when there might be an incident, and I don't. Even those people who did it, I don't necessarily hold, I don't hold anything against them, because I also understand that sometimes I'm not excusing it, but kids can say the meanest things that they know that are going to get under your skin, and once they find that, they kind of just, you know, they just really attack that point, and they
Mm,
saw that it worked, and so people would know to turn to that specific thing about my identity, because I was already
because it bothered
uncomfortable in
you,
it. Yeah.
right? Wow.
Yes.
Mm,
Yes. Yes.
interesting.
Yeah.
So what? So you're getting involved with these gangs, and then what happens?
Well, it's kind of like you don't just start off thinking you're going to be a gangster
Right.
necessarily, right? That wasn't my inclination. That wasn't a thought, any part of my thought process. But you do one sort of thing that is, wrong. It's easier to do the next sort of thing, right? And you can continue to, it's easier and easier to do, worse and worse things. Just like one mitzvah leads to another mitzvah, and you can do more mitzvahs, and that momentum
Mm,
kind of pick up. The momentum just had me spiraling down a path that ultimately allowed me to commit acts that created this sort of identity on top of my top of what I believe is like that pure neshama, right? On top of that, this other person, I built myself up into something else, and but I took pride in it. A lot of times people ask, well, how did you, this sort of moral dilemma, and how do your conscience deal with it? You're rationalizing your behavior, you're excusing it, you're not deeply reflecting on it. I did consume like massive amounts of like marijuana, and that helped. I won't say it helped, but it helped me not deal with the sort of moral quandary, and the deep reflection that I needed to do. So I
mm,
want to continue to go down this particular road, and I felt it's not just fitting in and belonging. I had a sense of agency, where I could do anything I wanted, pretty much. If I wanted to go party, if I wanted to do this drug, if I wanted to commit this crime, if I wanted to, break all the rules, I could do it, and I had power, right? So that was power,
mm.
and I translated the fear others would have of me as respect or popularity. I was seen, right? And to me, the sort of currency that mattered most to me was being seen.
Being seen because you hadn't been seen before, or you were
I,
seen for all the wrong reasons.
for all the wrong reasons. So now I was seen in a way that wasn't. People were looking down on me.
Mm, wow. So were you close to these gang members? Did you feel like a bond with them, or it was just this sense of belonging and the sense of I'm part of something bigger?
Yeah, well, it wasn't like I had, I look at my children now, and they're developing, what I hope to be lifelong friendships, right? That they're
Mm,
happening at a young age, and I had friends here, there. They would switch. It wasn't like a deep
wasn't.
bond, but you do have a sort of connection when you're out there committing crime, and you're in your sort of secret society and secret club, so to speak. There is a sort of connection and a camaraderie that could develop, if you're having issues with other gang members, and you're bonded in, defending yourself against them, that you grow connected to them, But I wouldn't say it was a deep sense of any sort of friendship or connection like that. It just, again, I wasn't being picked on. I was being
Mm,
seen. I had
mhm.
power, and in a certain sense, a limited sense, I felt like I was popular, and all these things I hadn't experienced before, and I liked it. I really liked how it felt.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you ever think where it might lead you? Like where what road it might lead to you? Did you think that you might get arrested? Did you think that you might die because of, in one of these situations, of one of these shootings?
Yeah, I mean, maybe more abstractly, because I don't know how, if I truly understood, like, the extent of what consequences were, right? Yeah, you
Mhm.
get in trouble. It was more so like, just don't get caught, right? That's
Right.
the sort of morality. Is it wrong if you don't get caught? Um, and so I did. You hear hip hop songs, and it kind of it romanticizes this. Yet you
Mhm.
go to jail, or it's an early death, and in some respects, at least in the subculture I was involved in, it was a it was a part of the manhood process, right? If you
Mhm.
hadn't been to jail, then were you really a gangster? How could you be you weren't
Mhm.
really active in what we call the streets if you weren't going to jail, you had no jail record, and if you die, you die. That's part of the allure. It's a sort of risk
Mm.
to this. So I thought about it. Did I really know, you know, what that meant and the full extent of the ramifications of that? No, but I thought about it, but I romanticized about it, so it wasn't something that deterred me.
Hmm.
And I could add to that, kind of my conception of on a spiritual plane was that a lot of, what did it matter if I died now or 20 years from now, right?
Mhm.
If my memory or whoever I was is just stored, and it's a sort of biological thing. Once I died, I wouldn't know what I was missing out on, anything like that. So to me, it was very like I had a very existential stance at a young age.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I remember somebody said I was an ideological criminal, whatever that
Mhm.
meant, right? Not so yeah. I felt like consequences. I wasn't going to be determined by consequences. It's more important for me to be committed to something than to weigh things and calculate things of how it's going to affect me positively or negatively.
Very interesting, very fascinating. And you were also an ideological criminal in the sense that the people that you were robbing were drug dealers, right? It wasn't like average people. Did you justify what you were doing, the crimes that you were doing based on that?
Yeah, that was part of the what enabled me to rationalize it. I could say, well, these are gang members and drug dealers. They know what they're getting into. I'm
Mhm.
not robbing the grandma with the purse on the street or anything like that. I am robbing people who carry guns. They rob people themselves. They are involved in all sorts of violence, and it's just kind of this sort of macho alpha male.
Mm.
If I'm stronger or more strategic about it than you, then hey, uh,
Mm.
uh,
Right.
that's all bad for you, but it's good for me. So yeah, helped me
Justify.
rationalize.
Right, justify.
Yeah, and even I would say for a lot of criminals, uh, we have a sort of criminal ethos, a criminal code, and I felt like I don't want to say noble or anything like that, but
Right.
I wasn't just doing like the horrible things, like I said, just robbing old ladies
Mm.
and children and
Right.
whatever you could possibly do that's criminal. I wasn't doing that. I was robbing the bad guys.
Mm.
I'm not going to reflect. I wasn't reflecting whether I was a bad guy myself, but I was robbing
Right.
the bad guys. Yeah.
Right. Interesting. So at one point you did end up in prison. Tell us about it. You were arrested and you were arrested for many years.
Yes. So I ended up going to juvenile hall first, and that was sort of a rite of passage, and I didn't feel bad about it, or like I'm done with this sort of lifestyle. I just continue to go down this path, and eventually I was arrested with a 45 caliber handgun, a mini Uzi, stolen property, and they arrested me for a robbery.
Mm.
And I was 19 years old at the time, and I went to the county jail. That was the first place I went, to the county jail, and that was my first sort of what we call the big boy leagues. I'm in the adult jail, and it's a lot different. Everything's hyper governed by race.
Mm.
The violence you had to participate in was based on what race you were part of. And so, if and if races got into a fight with each other, everybody was obligated to participate, or else your own race would attack you worse.
You mean there was
Uh,
gangs in prison too? It was
there
like
was
you
gangs in prison, but I
and
would
you needed to
say,
be part of it in order to to
yeah.
survive?
Well, I would say yes, there are gangs in prison as far as the street gangs, but it's on another level inside county jails and prisons because the racial structure, and there were like prison gangs, right? There's the Mexican mafias, right? And so you would have all types of street gangs that fell under this umbrella. Right, but so it wasn't necessarily the street gangs that governed you inside prison. It would be these larger sort of prison gangs and the
Mm.
sort of prison racial politics that governed that. And so you didn't necessarily be part of a street gang when you were in prison, but you had to participate in whatever, you had to follow the rules of whatever race you were part of. And if that involved violence and a gang member
Mm.
telling you in order to do something right, often you would have to, do what they said or else face the consequences.
Wow, so similar to the street, you were still being governed by these other people or the voices of these other people,
Yeah, and I'll just say even more so. There's less
more so.
structure. There's less
Mm.
structure in the street, a lot more structure in prison, and no place to run. Right.
Mm.
Yeah.
I found it interesting also, you were graduating at that point, like, you had graduated school, you were a good student in school, you didn't really fit the prototype of this person who's not doing well in school, who's not intelligent, who's not capable. You were a very capable student.
Yeah, well, it makes it now, it makes it sound worse. I was a capable student, but I still, yeah. I mean, maybe that fits the whole. I was an ideological criminal, right?
Right.
I never had a problem with school. Um I had vowed never to read a book in high school because that was their rules, and I don't want to. Didn't want to read one of their books. Not that I didn't read. I want to read
Mm.
one of their books. I didn't walk home with school books or walk to school with school books. I kept everything on campus because it wasn't cool to be
Mm.
walking around with books. Yeah, I didn't have a problem academically, and I graduated. I was 16 when I started my senior year. Ended up graduating when I was 17,
Mm.
and then I got arrested shortly after in juvenile hall, and I was arrested until I was at 18, and then again I subsequently caught this main case that sent me to prison when I turned 19.
And how long were you sent to prison for when you were 19?
So I fought my case for about 3 years, and eventually I was sentenced to 24 years in prison. Nobody was
24
hurt.
years. Wow.
24 years. I have to say nobody was hurt again, not to like minimize my culpability or say the crime, try to make the crime sound better than it was. But just also say when you hear 24 years, it's like, oh, who did you shoot? Who did you kill? Right. And that wasn't the sort of situation. But the sort of sentencing structure they had in California at the time was enabled this to happen. So I had 4 years for the robbery. I had 10 years because a gun was displayed, and 10 years because they said that it benefited the gang, right?
Mhm.
Reputationally, people would
Mhm.
hear that the gang committed a crime and it would cause fear in that way. And so I got 20 years in enhancements, 4 years for the robbery. And, I was sentenced to one of the most notorious prisons in the state of California, which is Pelican Bay State Prison, maximum security prison. And where I thought, my life was over in many regards,
Yeah, what was your
because
reaction? I mean, to be sentenced to 24 years in such a prison, I can't even imagine. What were you feeling then?
it it was hard because I would say, like, I even asked, I've worked in a capacity as a professional now with transitional age youth, age 18 to 25, whatnot, and getting them to think about way far in the future is not,
Mhm.
not the easiest thing. And so I could just
Sure.
say that I couldn't necessarily see that far out into the future. I remember actually I was in the county jail when my friend at the time, who was 18, signed a plea deal for 4 years, and I just thought, wow, you're going to be 22 years old when you get out of prison. That's like, what are you
Right,
going to do with your
ancient,
life? That's
right?
old, right? Yeah, yeah. So it was hard for me to truly conceptualize, but I also thought about, oh, I'm gonna be in here for my 20s and 30s, and these are supposed to, they say the 20s are going to be the fun years, so to speak. Um, and so it was hard for me to try to. I was hoping for some sort of maybe I could get out on appeal or something would
Mhm.
happen that change it. And sometimes when you're young and you haven't committed yourself to any sort of pathway, you feel like, or you imagine, whether you're thinking about it truly in a deep reflection, that some sort of outside force is going to compel you to success, or something's going to happen, not knowing that your choices matter, and you do have choice and you do have agency. But I wasn't thinking like that, and so I felt bad, but I didn't. I glossed over it. I had to put on this mask of courage, like, I'm not. Oh, it doesn't matter. I'm
Mm.
still, and I just got that much more macho. I got to prison, and I tattooed my whole body up
Mm.
with, like, bullets, prison bars, and these sort of scary gang tattoos to fit in. But also kind of, beat on my chest and show like this didn't affect me, because I was really, again, my idea, and to a certain extent, not with this sort of negative and all the stuff I was doing, but to a certain extent, I do believe if you are committed to something, right, it shouldn't be, now I'm a Jew, I'm committed to Jew. I'm not going to say because everybody hates me, I'm going to stop,
Right.
right? So the consequences shouldn't deter me. I just didn't have a good reason. It was a bad reason. And so I was still committed, and I wouldn't let something like a little old quarter century in prison deter me from my identity, the only identity that I felt comfortable or good in a very limited sense, obviously. But yeah, I wasn't going to let it deter me. So yeah, I
Well,
didn't deal with it.
well, what was that identity? Like being what, this tough
Being
guy,
a
this
gangster, I was a
a
thug. I
gangster?
was a gangster, right? That was
And
that
you were doing
was
that in prison? You felt you could
Yes.
do that in prison?
I felt I
Mhm.
could do that. I felt I was surrounded by an entire subculture that understood that. And so
Mm.
this was an arena, this was a world in which I intimately understood and I knew how to navigate, as opposed to being in the free world, right? I would often go to the subculture, I was in Orange County, but I might travel to South Central Los Angeles. I might be on the east side. My gang enhancements are from a whole nother county, from
Mhm.
hanging out with gang members in a whole other county, right? I might be on the east side of Long Beach, but I have to go there to those neighborhoods and to those specific people. But here this
You were
was my whole,
surrounded.
yeah, it was my
Mhm.
whole world, and I understood it, and so I was comfortable in that sense, right? I have to
Mhm.
really say that sense, because
Mhm.
there's many times where you may die, you may be forced to do stuff you don't want to do, and you can't run from it. There's no way to be like, pause, right? This what it is, and you're sort of at the whim of whoever decides to commit violence, and if it's between races, then
You have
you're
to do it. You're
involved. Yeah,
compelled, right.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
What was your family's reaction when you were sentenced to so many years of prison?
I mean, they were devastated. My mother suffered through depression, right? I was her firstborn
Mhm.
son,
Mhm.
and to have me incarcerated for such a long stay, they were devastated, but they were supportive. They were
Mhm.
devastated, but they're supportive, right? I like to say that it was sort of those seeds of unconditional love that I didn't necessarily appreciate prior to me going to prison. Like, I really, now that I was more isolated, I was really to understand what I didn't have, and the sort of what I just took for granted.
Mhm. Mhm. Her love, her unconditional love and support.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
and the people that gave that to me were, I didn't necessarily reciprocate, right? I was committing
Mhm.
actions that they didn't like. I wasn't
Mhm.
showing loyalty to any sort of morality or the stuff they were doing for me. Yet I was doing that. I was risking my life for other gangsters who were nowhere to be seen
Mhm.
once
Mhm.
I was incarcerated.
Mhm. So you're in prison, you're in prison for 24 years, a long sentence. What was it like there? And how many years were you actually there?
So in Pelican Bay State Prison, which was a level 4 maximum security prison, I was there. I was in that particular prison for 4 years, 16 years in total. A little bit over 16 years in total. I was in prison, but I was there for about 4 years, and it was just a place that was on lockdown a lot. This spectacular amounts of violence, and a lot of times I was just confined in my cell. We used to often just take what we call bird baths, because you never knew when you would actually get out of your cell to take a shower, and we just pour cups of
Mhm.
water over our head and just
Wow.
take baths in the actual cell, because that was our life. And so
Wow.
um, uh, it was hard, right? It was hard. There's no way around it.
Absolutely.
But I didn't want to fully it's hard to take responsibility. I want to say it's hard to take responsibility. It can be hard to take responsibility when you've made a lot of poor choices. I don't say
Mhm.
mistakes,
Mhm.
because I made deliberate choices. They just happen to be very poor and not
Mhm.
informed.
Mhm. For sure. How are you gonna get out of it? So, that's where we have the turn of the story, like, how does the story change? Like, where did you find Judaism in prison?
Yeah.
How here you're painting this picture of this real gangster even in prison for 24 years. How did things change? Where did things change?
So there was quite a few things that happened. I was there for years. I embraced this identity. I had my whole body covered in prison tattoos. Um, and then there's a part that also I wanted to know about my supposed religion. I was Christian. I was raised Christian, very very nominally, meaning we didn't, on certain holidays we were there, but it wasn't a lot of that JC talk in the house.
Did you
And
believe in God at home? Did you
uh,
believe in a power in a
I
higher
believe
power?
I believed in the concept of a higher power, but more so because that was just my, oh, we're Christians, so it
Mhm.
wasn't like deeply thought of, right? It wasn't deeply thought of. So I believed in the concept of a higher power. I believed I was a Christian, but I wasn't living as such, and I didn't know what that all that entailed. And so I wanted to study it because in prison people were very confrontational, as I've already kind of
Mhm.
discussed, but even with ideas. So they would challenge you on what you believe. And
Did you
I
believe that
wanted,
God cared about your actions, or you didn't believe that?
if you asked me that question pointingly, I would probably would come to that conclusion and state that. Did I act as if
Mhm.
God cared about my actions?
Mhm.
Did I reflect on that? Did it cross my mind? No, right? It's you can understand something abstractly, but how are you in a practical
Doesn't affect
matter?
right.
Yeah. And so, but I wanted to study this religion I was supposedly believing in, and supposedly my culture, my tradition, and I got all the books on it, and I studied it, and I quickly surmised that there was no possible way I could believe in it. Right, it just didn't make sense. It was what I believed to be, stark inconsistencies, but because this was my sort of my religious background, since that crumbled, I believed all religions were fake. Right, it was
Mhm.
sort of opiate for the masses, and life was tough, and you needed this sort of existential crutch
Mhm.
to get through life. And so I studied religion academically. I read the Quran front to back. Studied Buddhism, studied different sort of religions, and I was the person that would argue with you based on whatever theological framework that you claim. So if you said you were this religion, I would say, "What? How are you this
Mhm.
religion? And how do you believe this?" If and I was, I had a little bit, I was a little bit versed in different sort of scriptures, and I could cite this and cite that, and try to challenge
So,
everybody. Yeah.
were you studying it in order to disprove others, like, in order to disprove the religion?
Uh,
Or you
uh,
had a real
I had a
curiosity?
curiosity. I had a general curiosity, but with with the sort of foregone conclusion that I wasn't
Mm.
necessarily going to believe in it.
Mhm.
But I had a curiosity of why, and maybe this is why I became a therapist too. I was big into like, why do people believe what they believe,
Mhm.
right? And it was that sort of, and then on top of that, I was also an argumentative person, and that sort of gang challenging that sort of thing had to have some sort of outlet as well, and so it became these sort of arguments that I got myself into, and I would challenge everybody, and that's what I was known for. And then one day, actually, Pelican Bay State Prison hired a reform rabbi, and somebody invited me there to just to argue with him. Right, that was
Mhm.
the whole point. So I just went there to argue with them, and I just thought, okay, never argue. I didn't know anything about denominations or anything like that, so I just went. I'm like, oh, a Jew? All right, I don't think I've ever met a Jew before. Let me go argue. Let me go argue with this rabbi, and I went there, and he said a few different things, and he said something to the effect of, uh, "We're not trying to convert you. You don't have to be a Jew. Just be a good person."
Mhm.
Right,
Mhm.
and to me that made a lot of sense. That I imagine that, why do I have to believe everything that you believe specifically, and be part of your religion to have a relationship with my higher power, right? And you weren't trying to force me, and so I never heard of a religion not trying to get other people to believe exactly, be who they are, right? Like,
Mhm.
and so that made, and so I was open. And then I also realized, he followed that up with that if you look throughout history, you'll see that Judaism has worked for the Jewish people, right? That's a simple
Mhm.
statement, right? So okay, simple statement, right? And I realized with these two things, I realized that
What do you mean that it worked for the Jewish people? That
like Judaism, we weren't about getting other people to believe what
mm,
we believe, right? But if you look throughout history, you see that it held us together and how we function and it sustained us. It worked. Judaism is enough and sufficient for the Jewish people. Doesn't matter if anybody else likes it or not. It's good for us, right? It was basic, right? And it was a limited understanding that I could even like I wouldn't even at the time know all that he meant by that
mm,
sort of statement. But what
mhm,
it did do is it spurred me to go investigate more because I realized that even though Judaism was like this sort of central idea or component that all these other major religions kind of branched off, took what they wanted, and then did their own thing with it. Like I didn't know anything about it, and
mhm.
so I felt like, oh, even if I have a sort of academic understanding of a lot of religions and I don't have it about Judaism, it's a real sort of gap
Right.
in my knowledge base. And so learned. Actually, the first book he gave me was To Be a Jew,
Mhm.
which is it's a book from the Orthodox perspective, right? Because how else do you explain what it means to be a Jew without explaining the sort of tradition that was the only sort of tradition, so to speak, for thousands of years before any other sort of denominations really popped up in the way it's popped up now. And I would say real quickly, I started to fall in love with Judaism. Just one, it made sense. These rituals they had a function, and it was to tie you and draw you closer to Hashem, to higher power. But it was first more logically I reasoned. I needed a logical explanation that allowed me to continue to explore, right? And I really thought about it. I thought that you had this people that we're able to have a perception and enter in a relationship with the source of all being, with God, Hashem. If we think about Har Sinai and the revelation, right? And so you needed a perception, right, to perceive the God, and then enter into relationship, and that right there created the Jewish people in a fundamental sense, foundational sense. And then the sort of Masorah, right? God's will manifested in the world, kept the people together for thousands of years of unrelenting persecution, right? And they positively impacted every single society disproportionately that they were in. Not only that, the Jewish mission in the world wasn't to like accrue wealth and fame and power, right? It was a moral sort of mission, right? And to spread that, and the idea of God that they brought in the world, these other religions, it really affected how billions of people thought about the higher power, right? They sort of adopted the concept of, in a limited context, of our concept of a Jewish God, right, which was Hashem revealed to us. And so I'm like, this is a significant idea because you don't impact billions of people and change the whole moral landscape, especially if you thought about Jews back in the pagan world where morality was totally in disarray and Jews were like the you can kind of see it now post October 7th, right? Like the
Mhm.
stark difference in our understanding of what morality is and
Mm.
other people's, right? And so to me, it became pretty like how else do you sustain a people, how do you explain the Jewish experience in the world without there being a God and the Jews having a
Mm.
relationship with God? So the Jewish people to me became this sort of ultimate proof that God existed. And since I had this sort of right, there was no better way to live your life than how the Jews are doing it. And here's the empirical sort of evidence, if you look at it, for thousands of years. Um, uh, I want to be connected to that. I want to explore it more. And the more I explored, the more I fell in love. And I would say it I didn't know about the denomination, so it was a limited sense, right? All right, maybe I'm like this reform, and because I didn't feel like necessarily this wasn't me giving up crime. I don't want you to think I was doing anything extreme like that because of this, but because there was gang members in there from
Right.
different sort of faiths that they were still gang members. They just happened to have a religious belief system, right? But as I, understood what was Judaism, right, and it was our interaction with our Masorah, which was our sort of interaction with God or the commandments. That's how we connect. Where I felt like these mitzvahs, which I thought were just so we're going really into this minutia. Why does we have to do this? Right? It's not that serious. Well, does God even care? Right? But then I understood, right? Like it's a relationship. You mentioned a
Mm.
comment back in the earlier that did you believe God cared? Right? And and yeah, you don't reveal yourself in this world if God doesn't
Mm.
care. And if you care back, you want to do right. You want to do things that another person cares, or another, if God cares about something, I want to do that. And by doing it, these mitzvahs gave me a way to actually connect with the infinite power that is Hashem. I was able to connect and grow. And so the more I did, the more I believed, the more I felt connected, the more it cemented my understanding. And so in prison, I had decided that I wanted to be an Orthodox Jew.
Mm.
Obviously, there were some things getting in the way of that, prison and all, right? But I did this without a sort of Orthodox rabbi, without an Orthodox community. So this was very, I don't want to say abstract, but it was in a vacuum, right?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have anything of experience. I glimpsed truth, and I wanted to be connected to it. And again, if I'm committed to something, it doesn't
You
matter. I'm
go all
not
the
gonna.
way.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
go all the way. So I would just say this: I felt very awkward the first time I put on my yarmulke in prison, because now I'm taking on this identity that says I'm not a gangster, I'm not a thug, and I have moral standards that people could hold me to. Uh, but maybe somebody's going to try to take advantage. It's not necessarily the
Mm-hmm.
best sort of environment
Mm-hmm.
for that. But again, I wasn't going to be deterred, because I sensed it wasn't me just being committed to anything, to my old sort of just the sort of what I was feeling I lacked, and me really trying to. This was me being committed to what I believed the purpose of the ultimate purpose of a man could be, ultimate purpose of of a Jew can be, of that sort of connection with Hashem. And so I wanted to try to be committed in whatever way I could be, with my limited understanding, of course.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
something. So
yeah,
you were attracted to the fact that the Jews were God's people throughout all these generations, holding to a firm moral code and teaching the world this moral code, even though, there was so much persecution they faced tremendous persecution because of that, which is kind of like your story, except your ideological code was very off. You were
yes,
committed to a certain ideological code of crime, because you didn't know any better, but it was an ideology. And here you
yes,
said, I'm going to be committed to this code of Judaism, which is the truthful ideology, no matter what, even in prison.
yes,
And
yes, exactly.
did you face pushback from that? Like when you started wearing that yarmulke, that kippah in the prison, what was the reaction of the other inmates?
Yeah, it was mixed, right? I had you had people, because you will perceive, a lot of people in prison perceive Jews to be white, because you're
Mm.
classified by what you appear to be, and that's who
Mhm.
you have to associate yourself with. So they would say, "Oh, you're trying to be white," right? So I got the same sort of pushback I had when I before I adopted the gangster identity, and what drove me towards the gangster identity, right? It was, you are black, or you're not black enough. And now me
Mhm.
trying to be right really struck
Mhm.
at the core of my identity.
Mhm.
Uh, uh, but now this was a more I developed this identity for healthy reasons. This wasn't me. This wasn't a sort of an unhealthy sort of persona that I was adopting. This was a quest for truth. So
Mhm.
I wasn't moved by that. And there was people too that would be like, "Oh, well, the original Jews were black, so you're just connecting with your whatever." And I understood. I'm like, that's not how any of this works. Not
Mhm.
only does that how anything works, but I don't really care about skin color, because I don't believe in a concept of a black Jew or a white Jew, right? Because those
Mhm.
are America's color-coded social constructs, and
Mhm.
nowhere do I look in our Masorah where we are supposed to graft color-coded social constructs on top of Jewish identity. But I also, there were some people that, well, they might be religious, or whatever. They just seen me trying to do something positive, and they were for that. So it was mixed. I would say it was mixed, depending on who it was and what the situation is. It was a mixed sort of experience.
I find it, very fascinating that here you're embracing Judaism, the idea of the construct of Judaism, but you haven't even met any Jews. You don't even know any
Uh,
Jewish people.
yeah, well, I would say very limited, right?
Very
I
limited.
actually transferred from Pelican Bay State Prison, I ended up working for they had a Reform rabbi who was in charge of the Jewish chapel, right? And
Mm,
so I ended up becoming the lead Jewish chapel clerk, right? Helped with Jewish programming, and it was actually there when I had exposure to this whole Jewish library as well. And so the library had all types of different Sephorim books that I was very much exposed to a lot more, not Jewish people, right? There were
mhm.
Jews here and there. There was no observant, right? There was no,
Right.
there was no from Yidden where I was at, right? So I definitely wasn't exposed to that. These were all through books, through, that's where I experienced or at least viewed Judaism. But it was enough because you can't. If emes is emes, it's gonna be able to be conveyed through book. We are the people of the book, so I think we understand that, right? But that's
Right.
how it really pulled me in, and I knew that since it was emes, that the free
MS
world.
means truth. Yes.
Yes, yeah, I knew that since it was emes, it was truth that the reality in the free world would have to mirror this, in a significant capacity because this is truth. This is not smoke and mirrors, right?
Hmm. And were you ever disappointed when you got into the free world? Like here you had this ideal version of Jews. When you actually met Jews, did they live up to that version?
Well, I would say I understand human beings to a certain extent. Never fully understand, right? I like to say I'm a therapist. I understand a little bit,
Mhm.
right? But you know, people are going to be people. People are dealing with all their sort of experiences, their traumas, and all that. So you can meet somebody that, we'll just say, a rough around the feathers, or how rough, or
Mm,
whatever the sort of
mhm.
phrase goes. But I would say, in my experience, that I have met the most genuine, loving, accepting people uh, in Jewish communities across the country. Right?
Mhm.
That's been. I've never felt more warmly embraced than I have by the Jewish community. It was actually, I wrote a rabbi from prison with my interest to convert, right? Rabbi Yisrael Senior of Beth Jacob in Irvine. And he wrote me back and said the community would love to welcome you when you get out of prison, right? So
Wow.
even before I got out of prison, it was sort of
Wow.
embraced in a way.
What did you write him? Like, what would you write him that he
I
would
wrote him.
convince him that you were sincere?
Um, I wrote him a 14-page
Oh,
sort of
wow.
my journey. Yeah, it was a, like, this is where I was. I had to tell them all of who I was, right? The ugly, the bad, a lot of ugly, a lot of bad, right? A little sparks of potential of what I want to be in it, and he decided to write back with that, right? And that really allowed me. It gave me a lot of hope because you're right. I didn't know any Jews in the free world for sure, right? And who, I wanted to be Jewish, but who did I know, and who would take a chance on somebody whose whole body is covered in tattoos, has spent, over a decade in prison? Like, who's going to take a chance on me? The Jewish people did.
Mm.
And when I got out of prison, the Rabbinical Council of California, the RCC, they did, right. They gave me a chance, right. And I think more than anything, just having a chance uh, was just, the most it led to the most sort of significant, impactful course and trajectory of my life. Because if I didn't have that, it didn't matter how much I want or how much I just yearned to be a Jew. There's no way to actualize that, then that's what it is, right? And so I was given the opportunity, Baruch Hashem, I was given the opportunity to be a Jew.
Wow. So you really persevered and you went through for, you had a goal and you persevered to do it.
Yes,
Wow.
with help of God, with help of God,
With the help
because
of
there's a
God.
lot of shaky situations in prison. Even when I decided I wanted to be a Jew, because again, you could be whatever you want. You could have all the sort
Mm.
of wants, you desires to. I want to be this. I want to be that. And then somebody says there's a stabbing going on. And now you have to defend yourself or something like that. So Hashem really protected me through so much. Can't even go into all the details, but
Right.
I'm very grateful.
And your sentence was commuted, I understand. It was made shorter.
Yeah, so I had
That
24
24
years.
years.
Yeah, usually you do about, if you don't get in trouble. Was getting in trouble, but you're able to get out about at 85% of your time. Like, so it would have been like 21 years of a 24, but they passed what they call a youth offender bill. Crime was committed under the age of 23. If you show significant progress while you're in prison, you have the ability to get an early parole. And so that's why in 2018, I was able to earn an early parole date and get out a
Wow.
little bit after serving 16 years in prison.
And that was when you decided to become a therapist and help people who were in prison as well?
Well, I decided prior to me getting out that I wanted to become a social worker
Mhm.
because I could use my past and my understanding to maybe affect and change lives. And part of let's say part of teshuva is not when you've done enough wrong as I have, right? It's not just about sort of making amends and making right for what you did, but I think it's beneficial if you can help others
Mm.
change their lives. And so I went down this path. I started my sort of academic career in prison, earned my AA, started taking bachelor levels courses, had to pay for it, so it was a slow go. But when I got out of prison, I immediately went into my bachelor's program, finished it. First semester, I finished it, went into a master's social work program at University of Southern California. Then I eventually got my doctorate in social work, and yeah, started earning my hours to become a licensed clinical social worker.
So what was it like to, acclimate to the real world coming from prison? I mean, that must have been very, 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 like, different. A
Yeah,
culture shock.
it was a culture shock to a certain extent. I had a contraband cell phone in prison for a long time, and
Mm,
so I was able to see a lot of the stuff going on. Obviously, it's not the
mhm,
same as experiencing it. So I was able to see, and I was a person that I read a lot, and so I had some sort of understanding. Obviously, the experience is on a whole new level, but I was so just really focused on the goals that I needed to accomplish because I was essentially creating a life out of nothing, not
mm,
just wanting to become a Jew, but I had to earn a living, right? I had to,
mhm.
I had to like, and I'm starting,
Absolutely.
I'm starting late in the game, and I have this sort of scarlet letter on me of a criminal record, right?
Mhm.
Like, you go to the job interview, oh yeah, yeah, did some armed robberies
Right.
back in the day, and gang enhancements. The actual what they describe gang enhancements in California is it's a charge of street terrorism, right? So if
Mm.
you look me up and you see street terrorists, armed robber, right? Like, it's not. So with all that, so I just stayed focused, and I knew like the first day out of prison, I was already online filling out a FAFSA application to get financial aid for college to pay
Mm,
for my tuition and all that. I was knowing that I have to really be focused. There's no time for me to catch up or make up for lost time as far as doing like these fun events or anything like that. I don't have a savings or
mm,
anything like that. I'm literally
mhm.
creating a life from scratch, and so
You were
so I would just
literally like a
focus on
different
that.
person. You were literally, like, reborn. You were completely a different person. You weren't thinking about going back to your gangs at all or going back to your previous
Yeah,
life. It was a
yeah,
completely different person that was coming out of prison.
yeah. I mean, you make a good point, right? And even when we think about in terms of rehabilitation, it carries the connotation that if somebody's been rehabilitated in the first place, they knew how to live, and now we got to get them back to that. But for many of us, and me especially, I didn't know how to live. That's why that's
Mhm,
one of the reasons I
mhm,
ended up in prison, right? And so I was a new person experiencing life like for the first time in many senses, and so it was a lot. But again, I felt like I was going down a path that was a good path, and it was
mhm,
aligned with who I was supposed to be, and
mhm,
so that was my main focus. I wasn't, and I just locked in, and you accomplish your goals, and you just focus on the next goal, and you focus on the next goal, and I just kept my head down, and I wasn't worried about old friends because I had to move to a Jewish community. I was in a Jewish community. Like didn't have old friends living in the Jewish community, right? Like it was, these were new friends and new experiences. And it was the first time that I ever in my life felt part of an actual community. And being part of an actual community, you feel like you're responsible, right? You feel like I'm
mhm.
responsible for representing my community, for helping my community. And that's what really kind of guided me. And that's what was my sort of focus.
And how were you accepted by this community? I mean, here's this ex-convict coming to visit this new community, there must have been some suspicion.
I imagine there was a lot more suspicion behind the scenes, right? I probably would have checked it. Who is this person? And he says this, right? Like, okay, he just got out of prison, though, right?
Right.
Like, and Irvine is the safest city in America about 18 years in a
Mm,
row, right? Like, so it's like
mm,
consistently, it's a very suburban, safe neighborhood. But I could just tell you this, and I imagine it's with the rabbi's lead. There was, I met a good friend of me now. Mr. Mark Ellman. He's in his 60s, but we just developed a good friendship, and he was inviting me over, and so people would just invite me over or have Shabbos meals with me, and they'll see that, oh, okay. He doesn't seem like the guy that's just going to rob the whole house and just walk out or something like that, right? And as people got to know me, I feel like I just felt like I was just warmly embraced, and I didn't expect it. I'm a person that I'm not looking for. You don't even have to be friendly. You don't have to say hi to me. I'll come in the shul. I'll pick up my sitter. I'll connect with Hashem. I'll learn. I'm not trying to be like super, everybody has to socialize with me. But I would say that so many people seem to go out of their way to socialize with me, to invite me for Shabbos meals, to make me feel welcomed. And a lot of times we talk about people getting out of prison, going back to crime. But
mhm,
what people don't lift up as much is the power that community plays. If
mm,
you are going to a community and people aren't judging you, they're not holding
mm,
you to the poor choice you made, a decade and a half ago, right? If you have a community, I think that changes the game. And so the community allowed me to truly rehabilitate and reacclimate back into society with a sort of support system and structure in place.
mm.
So Judaism, I think, is the ultimate rehabilitation program.
Wow. And how do you help people who are now in your previous situation as a therapist? Like, why do you feel you can relate better to them, and how can you help them given your background and given your past experience?
Well, I remember a social worker. Remember being in juvenile hall and a social worker coming to me, and she looked like she just fresh out of school, and she made a bit look at I don't don't know her name or anything like that. I'm not trying to say she could have been the greatest social worker in the history of social workers, right? I just as a young black boy, I'm like, this person has no idea what I'm going through. And not only that, they're representatives of this state, the state's
Mm,
system that I feel is trying to lock me up, right? And so
mhm,
I didn't trust and I didn't want to connect. So I felt like me, a person that has been on that sort of other side and dealt with what I've dealt with and experienced what I experienced, I come with a level of understanding that will maybe make somebody more likely to feel like, oh, this person's not judging me, right? The
mhm,
street terrorist is not judging me, right? And maybe he understands more, and I'm more willing. Even when I go speak at different sort of schools. I have people coming up with telling me like different sort of problems and struggles they're having, right? It's not related to crime or anything like that, but they just feel, I believe, that you can be more vulnerable with somebody that you feel is less likely to judge, right? I think that therapeutic license and a rapport is the sort of fundamental way people buy in for you to be able to change, or for them to be open and
mm,
willing to change. But now I go inside prisons. I provide therapy to people in prison preparing for the parole board. I help people out during reentry. I've worked in collaborative court systems. Right. I work right now at the Chabad Treatment Center with people struggling with different sort of addictions, and people hear about my past and they connect with it. Different parts of themselves connect with it, and I'm able to affect not all the time. Obviously, you don't bat one. You're not batting perfect in this, right? But as our tradition teaches, like one person is a whole world, and if you're able to affect one person, you affect a whole world. And being in a position where I hurt so many worlds, and being able to try to heal and affect so many worlds now, Baruch Hashem, it makes me feel good, right?
mm.
I feel good, and more so than just feeling good, I feel like I'm aligned with my purpose and a mission that I've been called for, so to speak. I just
Absolutely.
went through
Wow.
a convoluted way to get here, but nonetheless, I feel like I'm actualizing that mission now.
Well, it sounds like your convoluted path has made you the person that you've become, which is a very unique individual who's really out there helping people. When you think about your past, do you live with regret at all?
Do I have any regret? I have a lot of regret. What I did, the choices I made, whatever the reasons were behind it, they were ultimately wrong. They weren't connected to MS. They weren't connected to Hashem. They weren't connected to just sort of basic morality. And I caused a lot of pain. I caused my family pain. I caused the victims of my crime pain. There's no way for me to try to say, well, they did this or they did that, and therefore I was justified in doing what I did. So there's a lot of regret on that. Right? Most of my life, I don't want to say I threw away, but I limited my experience of it by my actions. Baruch Hashem that I got a second chance, and through this that Hashem allowed me, right? Because it's only through Hashem that I was, I was allowed to go down this path. That I was allowed to even meet that particular Reform rabbi to argue with him, and he gave me to be a Jew, and then I traveled down this path. So I regret my actions, and I am just grateful that despite my actions, I sit here before you today as a Jew.
And we're so
Yeah.
grateful too. Yes, and for all that you're doing. I know that you are rushing to a session with a patient, but let me ask you one last question, which is, what message would you like someone who's listening to this? What would you like them to hear from it? What would you like them to be? How would you like them to be inspired by your story?
I like to say, well, one, I hope you're inspired and you don't feel like committing crime, right? But I'm imagining the people who are watching your program are not going to have that problem. So I would just say that if you're trying to make a change, no matter what it is, it doesn't have to be as significant as a change as I did, right? That there's always a chance, right? You always have the opportunity to do so, and don't delay it. Don't delay it. And if you are if you're a Jew, just understand that you have just the greatest, most impactful tradition that's fundamentally changed the world. Embrace it, connect to it, and understand that those mitzvahs are allowing you to have a relationship with the source of all being, with Hashem. And you have the ability to have a relationship, right? Why don't seize that opportunity and grow into that opportunity? You can take your baby steps. I'm not saying rush into it or anything like that, but you have something that's so special and gave so much to the world. Partake of it. And if you've made mistakes in your life, just know that every day is a new day to grow in your relationship with Hashem and try again, right?
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Dr. Yehudah Price, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for all that you're doing and continued success in helping people to overcome their past, overcome poor choices, and be their greatest selves and connect to God and Torah. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Wow, there were so many parts to that interview. I'm not even sure where to begin. So many lessons that we can learn from it. To begin with, first, that sense of belonging that Yehuda was missing as a child, and how being in the right environment and belonging to something greater than you are, how that was really something that pushed him away from living a moral life and attracted him to the gangster life. And I guess that's really a message for all of us, that when we can embrace people around us. We see later on in his story how he was embraced by the Jewish community and how that made such an impact on him and such a difference to him. Even though at that point he had a criminal record, yet the Jewish community really embraced him. I felt that was an important thread that was running throughout his whole story. Another thread that I felt was so important was his conviction to the truth. And you see that in some level, his conviction to do whatever needed to be done in a negative way in his commitment to the gangsters and the gang crime and the rules of the street. But you see that same fortitude continuing when it came to actually embracing truth and Torah and God and faith. And how when he was faced with something that he really understood was the truth, it didn't matter that he was in prison. It didn't matter that he wasn't, the people around him would have scoffed at it. It didn't matter what the outside world would think about it. He was ready to embrace it fully, head on, all the way, no matter what, even though he hadn't really met that many Jews at that point in time. And I felt that was something that really speaks about his personality and who he is. Also, of course, the obvious lesson is that it's never too late to make change, even when you're in the darkest of circumstances, as prison life was, when he had this reputation of this terrible criminal. He was still able to embrace a life of truth, a life of Torah, a life of mitzvot, leave his past, and not only leave his past, but actually take the lessons that he learned from it to help others to reach the same conclusions that he is reaching, and to help others to rehabilitate themselves, which is what he's doing as a therapist. And I felt that was really so powerful, how each of us can really whatever path we're going on that we feel is not something that is enabling us to shine our greatest light, to be who we can really be, to really become our greatest potential. We can embrace it. We can make choices that change our life completely around, as Yehudah did. If you enjoy watching these videos, I hope you are subscribed to Chabad.org/extraordinary. You can find us as well on YouTube. Please make sure you're subscribed there so you get notified when a new episode hits our podcast. We're also on Spotify if you're on the run, if you're going on Spotify and all podcast platforms. Thank you so much for watching and for being part of this extraordinary community.